My name's Peter Grunwald, and before I even mention who I am and the rest of the more distinguished panel, I just want to give you a sense of the qualifications of the conference organizer and at least one of your speakers. Last night, Warren Buckleitner and I spent a good 15 minutes unable to figure out the technology of the slot machine. And I kept begging it to take my money, and it wouldn't. We finally figured it out. But that is a true and very embarrassing story. I should have read my Hunter Thompson first. Anyway, Grunwald Associates, which I run, is a research and consulting firm. I am not going to go into any of the research that we do for time reasons, but I'll just mention that we do both consumer research with partners such as MySpace, Microsoft, and Verizon. We also do work in education technology. For example, 2 days ago, PBS just released the annual survey that we conduct for them on educational technology and media use. There are copies of it on the back table, and I'm happy to get it to you if you're interested. We have an extraordinary panel. And I want to sort of frame the discussion in a minute or two, but tell you first who is on it. We're expecting David Pogue, who's the technology columnist for the New York Times. We have up here Vicky Rideout, who is the person for the Kaiser Family Foundation, I believe, and who conducts what, in my view, is some of the very best research regarding children's media use and the implications. And then we have Mitchel, a professor at MIT, who is a leader in the design of actual new media products for kids and services for kids and looking at the impact thereof. Warren asked me to ask my son what the year 2040 would look like in terms of kids' services. And my son, who's 11 years old, started to babble about the brain-computer hybrid and implants in people's brains and using that to compress evolutionary changes. And I started to kind of glaze over and realize that probably was not going to work to try to take his insights and understand them, much less communicate them. Then I looked online at projections for the year 2040. Couldn't find any, but did find some projections that were of mild interest that I thought I would quickly share with you. One is that nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners will probably be a reality within 10 years. That was about 15 years ago. The president of a vacuum cleaner company, by the way. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM in 1943. The world potential market for copying machines is 5,000 at most, which were IBM executives responding to the eventual founders of Xerox. I'll just skip to the, no one will need more than 637 kilobytes of memory for a personal computer. That was Bill Gates in 1981. By the way, most of this is from an article that had one favorable quote or that they approved of, and that was from Alan Kay, who said that, if I'm not mistaken, that the only way to predict the future is to invent it. So, the best way, I'm sorry. I knew I would get it wrong in some fashion, but...
Who cares about idiots who make bad predictions? What you should care about is who's making good predictions.
Right, the few and far between.
So the interesting prediction was there will be personal computers for everybody in the world in a worldwide network. That was a prediction that the ARPA community made, and they made good that prediction by inventing it, and that's infinitely more interesting than idiots like Bill Gates or Thomas Watson or Ken Olsen or any of these people. Don't worry about, of course, most people are going to make wrong predictions.
Now, since my firm does do work for Microsoft, I want the record to show that was Alan Kay talking, not Peter Grunwald. But yes, no, I on a very...
they have a hit team now?
On a less ambitious level, I will say, I completely agree, and I remember being almost laughed off a stage at one point for predicting that there would be computers that would break the $1,000 price point, not that many years ago. So yeah, I totally agree. Couple of quick observations just to frame things. If I can take another 90 seconds, and then we'll move it along to the panel. We see, based on the research that we've done, some important trends taking place. I'm just going to throw them at you and hope the panel can address them, or in some other context that can be addressed. One is that the distinction between producers and consumers of media is essentially disappearing. You see that in particular with kids and the degree to which they are producing their own media, and have been from an inflection point, according to our research, starting around 2003. Another is that the division, the boundary between entertainment and learning, which has been long predicted, actually is starting to happen. That the lines between them are becoming more and more permeable. We think the boundaries between school and out of school, particularly insofar as technology is involved, is going to become less and less important and ultimately will disappear. We think that that actually computing, and on this point I would take a little bit of issue with Alan, and I'd be very interested in what the panel would have to say about the question of, are there any decent or interesting computer applications or computer-based applications in schools? We'll get to that in a second, but we think in terms of the future that one of the most important developments is going to be the use of computers for assessment, and given developments in semantic technology, the capacity to use computers to assess what we ought to be assessing and aren't assessing now, which is creativity, which is flexibility, kids' ability to respond, and basically doing sophisticated kinds of assessments that right now we aren't getting at, and to the detriment of our schools and our culture, in my view. We also see the boundaries between editorial, advertising, and the consumer fading dramatically, particularly when it comes to kids, who are increasingly going to be viewed as partners, not as targets for advertising on the part of companies who advertise. Also, some observations which I won't share with you right now in regards to political mobilization and the impact that we see there, and some of which we've started to see, although it's fallen off in the last presidential election. So let me pass it along to folks who are actually smarter than I am and know more than I do. As I said, we're expecting David Pogue, who is the technology columnist for the New York Times.
I'm here. I'm here. Oh, you can ramble on forever.
Well, you know what? You don't look like David Pogue, actually. And in fact,
What do you expect a 78-year-old to look like, for crying out loud?
You know that, and you look very different than your pictures in the New York Times.
Well, that was a long time ago, Sonny. It's 2040, for crying out loud. At least it was when I was playing with that iPhone app iWarp a minute ago. I've been asked to give a few notes about kids and tech in the last couple of decades. Wow, that's a big microphone. Must be an antique of some kind. I haven't seen one of those since the 2020s. Well, Sonny, when I was your age, I used to write for what they called a newspaper. Back in those days, they would print out the whole thing on sheets of paper. You got your news once a day. You wouldn't believe it. We did a lot of things the hard way in those days. When we wanted to check our email, we used to drive around town looking for a coffee shop. We did. Those days, internet bubbles were 150 feet across. That's it. None of this universal Wi-Fi. That didn't come along till the 2030s. Back in my day, movies came on plastic discs. Can you believe it? When you were done with it, you had to get in your car and drive it back to the shop that rented it to you. Cro-Magnon, I tell you. You know, the movies these kids are watching these days, it's disgraceful. Naked people touching and groping. It's not the Disney I remember. In my day, movies had a story and characters you cared about. And they used real people in movies, too. I know, these days it's cheaper to computer generate all the characters. You don't have to pay for insurance and meals and costumes and trailers. And I don't care if you say you can't tell the difference. I know the difference in here.